Before anything changes on the outside, there is always a quiet phase. Not emptiness, not stagnation. A pause that carries weight. If you're here right now, don't rush this moment. Let your breathing slow naturally. Notice how your body feels when nothing is being demanded from it. Notice how your mind reacts when there is no instruction, no urgency, no noise telling you what to do next. Some phases don't announce themselves as transitions. They arrive disguised as stillness, as silence, as a strange sense of withdrawal that doesn't come from fear, but from something deeper recalibrating. This is not the kind of quiet that means nothing is happening. It's the kind of quiet that happens right before alignment settles, before clarity sharpens, before movement becomes inevitable. You may have noticed it already. A subtle detachment from things that once pulled at you. Less reaction, less explanation, less emotional leakage. Not because you stopped feeling, but because you started conserving. This phase often confuses people who are watching from the outside. They interpret it as distance, fatigue, or loss of interest. But what they can't see is that something is organizing internally. Something precise. Something deliberate. There are moments when the soul steps back, not to escape life, but to observe it from a higher vantage point. To decide what continues forward and what no longer has permission to follow. If you've felt unusually quiet lately, not numb, not sad, just inward, this isn't accidental. This phase doesn't visit everyone. It finds those who are capable of holding themselves steady without external confirmation. Notice how this message doesn't rush you. It doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't try to convince. It simply sits with you. That's because this phase isn't about learning something new. It's about recognizing what is already taking shape. You may feel like you're between versions of yourself. Not who you were, not yet who you're becoming. That space can feel uncomfortable to those who need constant motion. But to those who understand silence, it feels familiar, necessary. And if this moment resonates, if it feels less like information and more like recognition, take a second to support this space. Like this video and subscribe. Not out of habit, but because messages like this appear when timing matters, and staying connected keeps you aligned with what's unfolding. Now return to the quiet again. Notice that nothing needs to be decided right now. Nothing needs to be fixed. This phase isn't asking you to act. It's asking you to stay aware. Because what comes after this quiet phase is not random. It's a shift. Not everyone moves through this quiet phase in the same way. For some, silence feels empty. For others, it feels heavy. For you, it feels structured. There has always been something different about how you experience transition. While many people search for signs outside themselves, you instinctively turn inward. You don't rush to label what's happening. You observe it. You let it take form before giving it meaning. You've likely felt this before, moments when you no longer resonate with who you used to be, but you're not interested in announcing a new version either. You don't need to declare change to make it real. Change, for you, happens quietly first. This is where misunderstanding often begins. People assume that if you're not expressing, you're disconnected. If you're not reacting, you don't care. If you're quiet, nothing is happening. They measure depth by noise and mistake containment for absence. But inside, there is awareness. There is evaluation. There is a slow, deliberate sorting of what still belongs and what no longer aligns. You feel everything, but you don't let everything pass through you unchecked. Love in this phase becomes more selective, not colder, clearer. You notice which connections drain and which stabilize, which conversations feel heavy and which feel grounding, which expectations are no longer yours to carry. This difference can feel isolating. You may look around and realize that very few people experience life at this pace. They move quickly through emotions you sit with. They abandon processes you respect. They rush toward conclusions while you remain with the question. And yet, somewhere beneath that isolation, there is a quiet confidence, a knowing that this way of being has protected you before, that your restraint is not fear. It's discernment, that your silence is not avoidance, it's depth. You don't need to explain yourself to feel valid. You don't need agreement to feel grounded. Your internal compass has always been strong enough to guide you without constant confirmation. This is why this phase feels both unfamiliar and deeply recognizable. You've been here before, even if the circumstances are new. Each time you emerged more aligned, more precise, less willing to compromise what matters. If you've ever felt like you don't fully belong anywhere, it's not because you lack connection. It's because your inner world requires a level of presence that not everyone can meet. Depth doesn't blend easily into shallow spaces. And as this quiet phase continues, one thing becomes clear without needing to be said. This isn't withdrawal, it's preparation. This quiet phase didn't begin randomly. It was shaped by what you lived through. Slowly, deliberately, without spectacle. There were moments when staying open cost you more than anyone realized. Not because the pain was dramatic, but because it accumulated. Small disappointments layered over time. Trust that was tested, then tested again. Situations where you were expected to adapt endlessly while others never adjusted at all. You didn't collapse when things broke. You recalibrated. You learned to move forward without dragging every emotion into the open. You learned which battles didn't need words and which truths didn't need defense. Silence became less of a reaction and more of a strategy. Some separations were quiet. No arguments, no explanations. Just an internal understanding that something had reached its limit. You didn't need closure from the outside because clarity had already formed within you. When you stepped back, it wasn't weakness. It was self-preservation. There were times you chose distance, not because you stopped caring, but because caring without reciprocity erodes something essential. You recognized that being available to everything meant being loyal to nothing, especially yourself. So you began to choose more carefully. What others might have interpreted as emotional withdrawal was, in reality, refinement. You were learning how to hold pain without letting it define you. How to accept disappointment without allowing bitterness to take root. How to remain functional, steady, and composed while something deeper was being rebuilt. You didn't turn cold. You turned precise. Every experience that tested you added structure. Every moment of restraint strengthened your discernment. Every quiet endurance clarified what you would no longer repeat. Nothing was wasted. Even the moments that felt like loss carried information. And here is the shift most people never see. This phase was never meant to break you. It was meant to prepare you. The weight you carried sharpened your awareness. The silence you practiced strengthened your boundaries. The solitude you accepted taught you how to stand without external reinforcement. You weren't being punished. You were being constructed. What once felt like endurance now feels like readiness. You're no longer reacting from old wounds. You're responding from alignment. The past did its work, and it no longer needs to speak. This quiet phase isn't about pain repeating itself. It's about pain finishing its role. And as it settles, something solid remains. Clarity, restraint, and a strength that no longer needs to prove where it came from. There is a reason this quiet phase feels heavier than the ones before. It's because something in you has stabilized. You're no longer searching for reactions, approval, or confirmation. Your presence has changed, even if your behavior hasn't. And people can feel it, especially those who rely on emotional noise to maintain control. You don't need to dominate a room to influence it. Your energy doesn't scatter, it holds. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you react less, your boundaries become clearer. This kind of contained power unsettles people who are used to intensity without substance. You don't perform strength, you embody it. Some people mistake this for distance. Others interpret it as arrogance. But what they're really sensing is self-possession. You no longer bend yourself to be digestible. You no longer soften truths to preserve comfort. And you don't chase understanding from those who haven't earned access. Your presence activates insecurity in people who depend on validation. They feel exposed around someone who doesn't need reassurance. They feel rushed around someone who isn't moving. They feel challenged by someone who doesn't compete. You don't argue your worth. You don't negotiate respect. You don't explain your boundaries. And because of that, dynamics shift. People either adjust their behavior around you, or they slowly remove themselves. Not because you push them away, but because your stillness leaves no space for manipulation. There's nothing to pull, nothing to provoke, nothing to use. This phase often reveals who was comfortable only when you were over-giving, over-explaining, or over-accommodating. When that stops, the imbalance becomes obvious, and imbalance cannot survive long in the presence of clarity. Your love no longer depends on being needed. It chooses freely. Your loyalty is no longer automatic. It's selective. And your silence is no longer passive. It's deliberate. This is why some people feel unsettled around you now. You are no longer emotionally accessible in the ways that drained you. You are present without being available, calm without being open-ended, grounded without being attached. That kind of power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't demand. It simply exists. And existence like that forces others to confront their own instability. You're not intimidating. You're anchored. And in this quiet phase, that anchoring is what changes everything, even if no one can quite explain why. At some point in this quiet phase, something locks into place. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with certainty. It feels like a line being drawn inside you, not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You don't announce it, you don't debate it, you simply stop offering parts of yourself where they are no longer respected. This is the moment many people never see coming. From the outside, nothing looks different. You're still composed, still polite, still steady, but internally, a decision has already been made. Energy that once flowed freely is now conserved. Attention that once lingered has quietly withdrawn. You're no longer waiting for things to change. You've changed your position. This is not emotional shutdown. It's emotional alignment. You recognize when patience turns into self-neglect, when understanding becomes tolerance of imbalance, when loyalty starts costing more than it gives back. And instead of exploding, you disengage. Not everyone understands this kind of boundary. Some mistake it for coldness. Others assume it's temporary. They think you'll return to who you were, more available, more forgiving, more accommodating. But this phase isn't about returning. It's about recalibrating. When you step back now, it's not to punish anyone. It's to protect the structure you've built. You've learned that access to your inner world is not a right. It's a responsibility. And once that responsibility is mishandled, you don't argue. You adjust. This is where your power becomes irreversible. You don't chase closure. You create it internally. You don't seek explanations. You trust your perception. You don't reopen doors just because someone knocks louder. Silence has taught you discernment, and discernment doesn't negotiate. There is no bitterness in this shift, no resentment, just precision. You know exactly what you can give, and exactly what you will no longer carry. That clarity feels calm, but it is firm. People often realize too late. They sense the absence before they understand the reason. By the time they ask what changed, the answer no longer needs to be spoken. The shift already happened. This is not withdrawal, it's activation. Not escape, alignment. And once this internal limit is reached, you don't move backward, not because you're unwilling, but because you're no longer built for what drained you before. The quiet phase was never meant to last forever. It was meant to prepare you for this moment, when restraint turns into direction, and silence turns into choice. There is a balance you no longer try to manage. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood something deeper. Some forces don't need your interference to work. You've seen it before. Situations that felt unfair at first slowly revealed their truth. People who acted without integrity eventually faced the weight of their own choices. Paths that looked like losses turned out to be quiet protection. None of it happened loudly. None of it needed your participation. This is the invisible law at work. You don't have to confront what time can expose more precisely. You don't have to defend what reality will eventually clarify. The energy you once spent trying to make things right has been released back to you. And with it came relief. There is a kind of protection that surrounds those who learn restraint. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding chaos. When you stop explaining, you stop reinforcing confusion. When you step out of the emotional current, things settle on their own. This isn't passivity, it's wisdom. You've learned that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It often means the most important things are unfolding beyond your control. where they belong. Life has a way of rebalancing what was misaligned, without asking for your opinion. What was taken from you without care carries its own consequence. What was mishandled cannot remain stable forever. What was built on imbalance eventually corrects itself. You don't need to witness it for it to be real. And here's the part that brings peace. You're no longer emotionally invested in outcomes that don't serve you. You've stepped out of the cycle of anticipation, reaction, and disappointment. You trust the process enough to move forward without waiting for proof. This trust didn't come easily. It was earned through experience, through watching patterns repeat, through noticing how life responds when you stop forcing resolution, through seeing that alignment attracts protection naturally. You may feel lighter now, even if nothing external has changed. That lightness comes from releasing responsibility that was never yours to carry. Justice is not your job. Balance is not your burden. Clarity is enough. When you remain grounded, things reorganize around you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. You don't need to push. You don't need to pull. You simply stay where you are, steady, aware, unattached. This is why you don't rush anymore. Why you don't interfere when something leaves. Why you don't panic when silence stretches longer than expected. You understand now that some answers arrive only when you stop asking. And in that understanding, there is freedom. You are protected not because you fight, but because you align. You are guided not because you demand, but because you listen. You are supported not because you seek control, but because you release it. The invisible law has always been working in your favor. You just needed to step back far enough to see it. There is something this phase is asking you to finally hear. Not from the outside, from within. You've carried yourself for a long time, quietly, reliably. You became the one who holds, who stabilizes, who doesn't collapse when things get heavy. And over time, that strength turned into expectation. From others, and sometimes from yourself. But this message isn't here to demand more resilience. It's here to acknowledge what already exists. You have been strong in ways that were never celebrated. You have stayed composed when it would have been easier to react. You have chosen integrity over relief, patience over impulse, silence over unnecessary conflict. That takes more courage than most people realize. There is a depth to you that doesn't ask for attention, but it deserves respect, especially from yourself. You don't need to keep proving that you can endure. Endurance was never your only gift. Awareness is. Discernment is. The ability to feel deeply without losing direction is rare. If you feel tired, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've been carrying weight without complaint, and you are allowed to put some of that down now. You are allowed to choose ease where you once chose responsibility. You are allowed to rest without losing your identity. Your value was never defined by how much you could handle alone. It was defined by how intentionally you move through life. This phase is not asking you to become harder. It's asking you to become gentler with yourself, without losing your boundaries, to honor your limits the same way you honor your commitments, to protect your inner world with the same discipline you apply everywhere else. You don't need to shrink to be accepted. You don't need to explain to be understood. You don't need to rush to be relevant. There is a quiet confidence in knowing who you are and allowing that to be enough, in trusting that the right connections will meet you at your depth, not ask you to surface. If this message feels personal, it's because it is meant to be, not as flattery, as recognition, a reminder that your way of being has meaning, even when it isn't visible. Let yourself receive that acknowledgement, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way you understand best. There is one last thing to notice, not as a conclusion, but as a signal. What you are experiencing now is not the end of a cycle. It's the quiet before. Momentum becomes visible. When a shift is real, it doesn't announce itself with noise. It settles first. It rearranges priorities. It pulls your attention inward and away from distractions that once felt important. You may feel less interested in explaining yourself, less drawn to old conversations, less willing to participate in what no longer matches your inner pace. This is not detachment from life. It's recalibration. Be attentive in the coming days, but not vigilant. No fear is needed here. Certain situations may repeat briefly, not to trap you, but to confirm your clarity. Certain people may reappear, not to stay, but to show you how much you've changed. These moments are not setbacks, they are confirmations. What is leaving now is doing so quietly. What is arriving is doing so carefully. This phase doesn't rush outcomes. It prepares you to receive them without distortion. And that preparation happens in silence, the kind of silence that sharpens perception instead of dulling it. Before you return fully to that quiet, allow yourself one simple act of alignment. If this message reached you, support this space. Like this video and subscribe, not out of routine, but to stay connected to what is unfolding here. Some messages don't come often, and when they do, timing matters. And if you felt this message rather than understood it, write, "I felt it" in the comments. No explanation, no story, just acknowledgement. Stay close. The quiet phase is ending, and the shift doesn't. Need noise to be real.